despite the destruction in Gaza, etc., that is a kind of bottom line for them. There's a few other demands as well, but unless Israel is willing to lift the blockade, there's not going to be a ceasefire.
So that's a non-negotiable on the part of the Palestinians. Now, we saw fighting between Hamas and Israeli forces resume almost immediately after the talks collapsed. What does this say, though, about both parties' commitment to resolving their differences in this dispute?
I actually think that neither party is, despite the public rhetoric, that neither party actually wants to have the fighting continue. From the Palestinian side, they need to pick up the pieces. The destruction is huge, massive in Gaza. Apart from the number of people dead and injured, just the infrastructural destruction is huge and needs to be dealt with. People need to be buried, all of the normal kinds of things after such a thing. So they don't want to continue the fighting. From the Israeli side, as much as Benjamin Netanyahu is a right-winger, and very kind of militaristic in these kind of issues, he's within a cabinet that is more right-wing than he is. So I believe that Netanyahu himself would have liked to stop this a while ago. But he's not able to do that because of the political tensions within his cabinet, his coalition falling apart, etc. And so he's now pandering to the most right-wing and most militaristic and terroristic, if you like, within his cabinet. So I think that both sides actually do want to end it, but both sides have demands that they're claiming are non-negotiable. From the Palestinian side, it's not just Hamas, but the other groups as well, are insisting on the lifting of the blockade. The Israelis are saying that they want disarmed Gaza, which is not going to happen, and I think that the Israelis know it's not going to happen, but they're keeping that as a kind of stick to be the negotiators with.
Now, the chief negotiator, al-Ahmed, blames Israel for the collapse of the talks, an accusation that the Jewish state has denied. Is Israel maybe to be blamed here?
Well, I think Israel is to be blamed. I think that the demands that the Palestinians in Gaza are making are eminently reasonable, starting with the lifting of the siege, the reduction of the buffer zone. So, Gaza is a narrow strip. Yes. At most of it, it's about 6 kilometers wide. The buffer strip that Israel has imposed on it is 3 kilometers all around. So where it's 6 kilometers wide, that has now become a width of 3 kilometers. So they're calling for reduction of the buffer zone. They're calling for fishermen to be allowed to go out to more than 3 nautical miles, which is what they're only allowed at the moment by Israel. So the Palestinian demands are eminently reasonable. That Israel is refusing to talk about those demands, I think, is Israel's fault.
Now, we talk about blame being assigned to Israel, and but how detrimental is this for ordinary citizens of the battered Gaza Strip? Because, it's imminent that they can't really do anything while the war is continuing and the bombs are falling on top of them.
They can't do anything. There's nowhere to run. Gaza is this narrow strip of 360 square kilometers. It's tiny. It's smaller than Soweto, with 1.8 million people. And they're completely hemmed in. They can't go anywhere. None of the borders are open. The sea is inaccessible. So their lives have been made pretty miserable, and that's just forgetting all the destruction of homes, etc. Like 400,000 people have become displaced in this period. So it's really bad, except that the position of most people in Gaza is that they support the view that there should be no ceasefire unless there's a lifting of the blockade. They've lived through 8 years of the blockade. They know what it means in terms of, as they call it, a slow death. And they're just not willing to accept it anymore. So one would have thought that after 5 weeks of this constant bombarding, that the civilian population will say to the resistance, that's enough, and we're withdrawing our support. That's not happened.
We have seen also at the inset that we're seeing currently here behind us is that the militants really are still going through those tunnels. They're working through those tunnels. They say Israel has indicated that they've destroyed most of those tunnels. The militants are saying they have not, and they're still working those tunnels.
Yeah, Israel says they've destroyed 40 tunnels, so let's accept that that's what they've done. 40 is a small proportion of the number of tunnels that do exist. Of course, there's lots of tunnels that go into Egypt, which is mainly to bring in supplies, but also tunnels that go into Israel to military bases, etc. And Israel saying that they've destroyed most of the tunnels is again a way in which Netanyahu would like to convince his public that this is a good time to end because we've done the job. They actually haven't. I think there's many more tunnels that they don't know about.
I think we can assume that there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but the US has shown interest in helping find a lasting solution to the conflict. However, those efforts have almost been taken a back seat under the Obama administration. Why do you think is that, though?
Well, I wouldn't say it has taken a back seat under the Obama administration. I mean, Kerry, for whatever the reasons are, I mean, I don't think that they're necessarily good reasons, but whatever the reasons are, Kerry has worked extremely hard to try and get some kind of resolution, some kind of a long-term deal. In the main, that has been undermined by the Israelis. The Israelis are really not interested in a deal that has a long-term resolution. What they're interested in is a slow process that will allow them to settle and colonize more and more of the West Bank and maintain the West Bank and Gaza as two Bantustans. So Kerry has not had any success, and it's mainly because of that. I mean, the last time he came up with a framework for a proposal, the Israeli cabinet leaked it. It was supposed to have been top secret. The Israeli cabinet leaked it and made him and the Americans look bad for undermining Israeli security. So I think, whatever my criticisms generally are about the Americans, I think on this that they have tried, but the Israelis are not accepting it.
But it seems like the Egyptians have been more successful in putting together some truces in the interim.
Oh, I don't think that the Egyptians have lost Palestinian support and Palestinian kind of trust. The only reason that they've managed to do these ceasefires is because there isn't much of a deal required. You just get both sides to agree to a ceasefire, and Palestinians have decided that they have a big enough enemy with Israel. They don't want to open up another front with the Arabs right now, so they're going along with it.
What is the alternative? So finding a lasting solution between the two warring parties, and how does one get to that solution?
Well, the solution, in my opinion, is abiding by international law. All sides abide by international law, which means Israel declares its borders. The United Nations would say the 1967 borders, which is 78% of historical Palestine being Israel and 22% being Palestinian. The two states with security for Palestinians in particular, the right of return of Palestinian refugees, which is guaranteed under international law, dismantling of all the settlements, all of which are illegal under international law, Palestinians getting back their water sources in the West Bank. I mean, if all parties agree to abide by international law, I think this matter can be resolved in the next week. But that's not what they're agreeing to do. Certainly Israel is not willing to accept international law. It's in violation of more than 80 UN resolutions.
Mr. Jinnah, thank you so much once again for joining us here on AM. That was the director of the Afro-Middle East Center, Naim Jinnah, talking to us about the failed negotiations in Egypt.